what's to come. All right, let's try this again. I'm Terry Thornton. I'm Curator of Education here at the Modern, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to Tuesday Evenings at the Modern. Tuesday Evenings is a weekly presentation series, that is free and open to the public, which is one of the many things I'm proud of here at the Modern. And I appreciate you all coming out tonight, and hello to all of you who are with us via live stream. Glad to have you as well. So there are a few announcements, just so that everyone can get their calendars in order for the coming days and weeks. We have some stuff coming up, and since you're my faithful, I know you're going to want to know about them. This Saturday, April 8th, we have a very special presentation at 1 p.m. with the artist Morrison Aliari and American artists. So they're going to be in conversation. They're both very creative, interesting people in their own right, and they happen to be friends, and they thought, and we thought it would be a nice idea to have them here together. So I hope you can make it back again, free and open to the public. The change is that it's Saturday at 1 p.m. It'll be an hour. Everything else will be as usual. And then we are back here next Tuesday, same place, same time, with the Modern's curator, Maria Elena Ortez, as she shares ideas, experiences, and passions that are demonstrated in past and upcoming exhibitions. So I think that'll be a real treat. And then finally, we close the season with Khalil Robert Irving, who was scheduled earlier in the season but had to cancel, so we're really happy to get to have him because he's somebody special. If you haven't seen his installation in I'll Be Your Mirror, be sure you make time for that. It's really wonderful. Same with Morrison and American artists. Be sure you check out their work before those presentations. And then finally, well, like I said, we close the season with Khalil. And then there is tonight. Tonight, this is a Tuesday evening's presentation that I have been looking forward to since November 2020, when the guest program curator, the artist Lauren Woods, invited Mendi and Keith Obadike to present their work for Tuesday evenings at the Modern, being there when we were doing the Zoom presentations during the pandemic. I will always be indebted to Lauren for that introduction. It was a wonderful presentation that you can still find on the Modern site. We decided then that we would have Mendi and Keith here when circumstances allowed, and while it took longer than I wanted, here we are tonight. Mendi and Keith Obadike are an Igbo Nigerian American couple who have who work collaboratively. Mendi is a poet with a PhD in literature from Duke, and Keith is a composer and sound artist with an MFA in sound design from Yale. Together, they make music, art, and literature. Their conceptually based internet art installations and performances have been enthusiastically recognized and received, having exhibited and performed at the New Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the MCA Chicago, and Whitechapel Gallery in London, just to name a few very impressive venues. They have contributed sounds and music to projects by a wide range of artists, including loops for the neo-soul singer D'Angelo's first album, and a score for playwright Anna DeVere Smith at Lincoln Center Institute. They were invited to develop their first opera, Masquerade, by writer Toni Morrison. Honors include a Rockefeller New Media Arts Fellowship, a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction, and a Louis Comfort Tiffany Biennial Award. So, impressive. In concert with being artists, Mendi and Keith are both educators and active participants in the broader art world. Keith teaches at Cornell and Mendi at Pratt. Keith has been a digital media editor for Obsidian, and Mendi a poetry editor for Fence magazine. They have also served as art advisors to the Times Square Alliance and Vera List Center for Art and Politics. And the list goes on and on and on and on. I have to admit that I'm a little overwhelmed by all that they have done and are doing, to the extent that I am convinced that this introduction cannot do them justice. So let's go straight to the source and hear from Keith and Mendi. If you would, please join me in a warm welcome for Keith and Mendi Obadike.
Thank you, Terry. That was wonderful, and we also really enjoyed the last time we were virtual, and Terry and John and Maria have all just been fantastic. So it's wonderful to work with you and to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to talk with you virtually, but it's really great to be here in person. Thank you all for coming out tonight.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of our old and new work. We're going to start with talking a little bit about our practice. We've been working together for the last 27 years. We're particularly interested in the power of listening and how sound articulates space. And by that we mean both architectural space and social space. Our work often employs strategies for activating archives, resonating structures, reordering and reorienting language, and sonifying data. Our practice is rooted in the richness of African and African American cultures, and across our works we have used as a lens or as an organizing principle Igbo proverbs, folk songs and folk tales from the African diaspora, and spirituals from the African American tradition. These function as cultural markers, but they're also formal elements in the work. Our thinking about sound and what sound can hold has led us to our works. And today, after briefly discussing our early works, we'll talk about a few different series. Americana Suites, Number Stations, Praise Songs, Lightworks, and Tono-types. And then we'll end by saying a little bit about our forthcoming works.
So we'll be covering a lot of ground, but I mean, this will be fairly informal, so we're happy to stop if people want to know more about a particular project, because we'll move through some images very quickly. So we started working together really in the mid-90s, and our early works were largely sort of digital projects. We were working online, working on the internet, and making sort of internet-specific projects. And we thought of these internet projects really, we thought of them as public art works. One of the first projects we did that sort of had a life of its own was this piece called Blackness for Sale that we did in 2001. And so we posted a sale for My Blackness on eBay with a list of benefits and warnings. And this was up for a few days, and it sort of circulated on its own. And we really intended for the project to sort of exist in the world of internet art. I think that's the first sort of community we shared it with, but then it sort of went around and sort of had its own sort of media life and sort of circulated in lots of interesting sort of international circles. And now we showed work, you know, in a museum context since then, but when we originally did this project, we thought of it as a piece for the internet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Around the same time, we did a piece called The Interaction of Colors, which was a sort of portal for entering the Whitney Museum site. The Whitney Museum commissioned it. Were you going to say something?
No, they called it a gate page, but I don't know, that's not it.
So we thought of this project as a kind of social filter. We were interested in these parallels between sort of social filters, social portals, and their digital equivalent. So, what kind of site do you need to pass through to get to another site? So our project was a color check system. So you would enter facts about yourself and photos of different body parts, and we'd give you a hex code, a digital number that represented your skin color.
We based it, I don't know if this will make any sense, but we based it on this notion of the paper bag test, which is a kind of a real-world social filter by filtering people by skin color.
And once we put the project up, of course, we heard from people around the world who had these sort of antiquated versions in their own countries. We heard about a pencil test in South Africa, another place where there were sort of race-based conditions for entering different spaces. This is an installation shot from, I think, when it was at the Whitney as a sort of physical installation in the space. All right, and later during the same period, we did a number of kind of online games, like simple sort of flash games, things using, a little bit of what was the sort of industry standard for sort of net artists at the time.
Yes.
So our highly pixelated, these were throwbacks then, 8-bit games. All right, and then our playing around with these 8-bit games sort of led to us working with performances. We wanted to take some ideas about color coding that we knew from sort of programming these sites and playing around with games and sort of use them in an actual performance space.
Mm-hmm. So we did this piece called Four Electric Ghosts. That was a performance piece, but we were thinking about lots and lots of ghost stories, including our understanding of the story in Pac-Man, as well as this novel by a Nigerian author by the name of Amos Tutola called My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. These two, the narratives behind both of them are very similar in kind of weird ways, but we also collected lots and lots of ghost stories and decided to tell stories from the perspective of the ghosts. So these are, this was a play, and we call it an opera masquerade, but it was performed at the kitchen, and there was something I was going to say about that, but I lost the train of thought.
Yeah, so we worked with a number of musicians and a group of dancers who were sort of members of the company Urban Bushwomen, and as Mendi said, we did this at a space called The Kitchen in New York, but we also took it to Carolina Performing Arts, and so we did different versions of this opera masquerade in different ways, but so this performance piece, of course, led to other projects, but we were thinking through color as an organizing principle, as well as sort of narrative things that we got from working online. And then in the sort of early 2000s, we went from doing a lot of our work on the internet in these digital spaces to doing a lot of site-specific projects. And we started a series of things that we called Americana Suites. And so these projects are dealing with what we think of as key moments in American history, but we are engaging those moments in history through sound installations, books, and performances.
Mm-hmm. So the Americana Suites have in common that there's a sound installation of some sort, and there's also 3 or 4 other parts to them that often include dialogue as one element, and there might be the video might be another element, but they're all a bunch of different nodes, projects with different nodes with a sound installation in the middle.
So this image is from a book and an installation that we called Big House Disclosure. Big House Disclosure was commissioned by Northwestern University. And we did this project across 2006 and 2007. And it was commissioned around the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the British slave trade, right? And so we wanted to look at what that meant specifically in the Chicagoland area. And we found out that Chicago had just created a new city ordinance that meant that any company that wanted to do business with the city had to disclose if they had profited from the slave trade historically, right? And so we interviewed people in the Chicagoland area to see if they knew of this ordinance, what they thought about it. And we incorporated things from those interviews into a 200-hour-long house song that played as a sound installation. So house music is a popular form from Chicago, and we use people's thoughts about this law in this soundscape.
The other thing about that is that the placement of those voices had to do with, we were tracking the rise and fall of the stock prices of the companies that had benefited from slavery. And so the movement in those triggered a different arrangement of voices that were playing throughout that 200 hours.
So we had a series of kind of private performances that we did around this project too. So there were performance scores. And, in some versions of this project, we gave these scores to other people to perform, and then we performed them ourselves. And so these images are included with the book that was produced in that project.
So the performance scores, the text scores were, there were text scores and graphic scores. The text scores were all related to a different room of the big house. So I'm not sure if this, I think this is the living room. I'm not sure what room this is. But this score is Make a Dress of Dollars.
And this is, the instruction here is do a headstand on books about
Slave ships.
Slave ships.
Yeah.
And then these are some images from the graphic scores that were performed by a group of musicians. So these scores were performed originally at Northwestern, but since then we did it at this place called the Stone in Manhattan, and then they're being redone in a month from now by an ensemble called Either Or, an experimental music ensemble in New York.
How do you read those?
Yeah, I mean, different people do them differently. The person who is organizing Either Or's performance asked us that, and we said that there's an agreement among the performers at the beginning.
So there are general recommendations we make, like we tell the performers to spend a certain amount of time, like we may say, spend 1 minute per page or 2 minutes per page. So they have general instructions like that, but the interpretation is sort of open to the performers. Mm-hmm. And so for, people who follow experimental music or improvised music, some people are very used to sort of interpreting graphic scores. For other people, it's a kind of new visual adventure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Do you have music yourself in mind when you are creating it?
Yes, yeah, but I don't usually share it with other performers, right? So they're kind of specific things that I imagine, but yeah, we leave it open when other people are interpreting, which for me is a challenge, like to kind of say, okay, I'm not gonna, really tell people how to approach it, and so what I found is like some musicians take the symbols very literally, meaning that they're really trying to interpret sort of visual details in it, and other people take it as a prompt for improvisation.
Yeah, some people receive it as like, okay, I'm going to use this to talk about direction or speed, right? Where some people, this is a mood, and I'm going to play this mood. It's very, very different from performer to performer.
Yeah. So that's just some documentation from the sound installation itself. But this next image is from another Americana suite. This is a project we did around 2012 called American Cipher. And here we were looking at the story around Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. So I'm assuming that a lot of people have heard that story today. The story has become better known over the years, right? So Sally Hemings was a woman who was enslaved and sort of owned by Thomas Jefferson. She was also his wife's half-sister.
The story that she carried and that her descendants carry is that she birthed children by Thomas Jefferson. By the Jefferson family, this story has been received differently over time. And then there was DNA evidence that linked her descendants to the Jefferson family. And so some institutions have changed the way that they talked about her and them after the DNA. So that got us very interested in what kind of narrative our stories around DNA tell. And
we were looking for a physical object, some kind of material link to these families. And like I said, we started this in 2011, 2012, and it was commissioned by Black National University. So we spent a lot of time at Monticello, and one thing that we found was a small bell that belonged to Sally Hemings. And at the time, there was no sort of part of the exhibition at Monticello that even really talked about Sally Hemings. All we saw was a small bell. And so, we asked them if we could ring it. And because I think there was sort of a lot less interest from the institution in Sally Hemings at the time, I mean, it wasn't easy to ring the bell, but after a few phone calls and letters, they said, okay, sure.
They don't get a lot of requests for that. So they're like, I guess we could do that. But it's not owned by Monticello. The bell is owned by Howard University, and it is housed, it lives at Monticello.
Yeah, so that whole story was very interesting, that it's on loan by Howard.
It's also the last remaining object that Sally Hemings owned, and it was given to her by her half-sister.
And it was passed down through her family, and her family eventually gave it to Howard University. So we made a video and sound installation from that. This shot is from when we exhibited it at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And so we took the bell sounds and we sort of stretched them out and morphed them, and we incorporated them with sort of field recordings from Monticello. So in those field recordings, you hear things like the different stories that were told about Sally Hemings and her relationship to the Jefferson family at Monticello. And so depending on what tour you took, you'd hear different stories. So if you took the tour of the main house, the big house, you heard that it was unclear what their relationship was, the relationship between Jefferson and Hemings. If you took the Mulberry Road tour, which is a tour of the slave cabins, then you heard that there was a relationship and they did have children together. So at the time, these stories were literally separated on the grounds. Now, I think they've done a better and more accurate job of telling those stories.
So we surrounded that story with other American stories about DNA, including a story about James Watson, who was one of the people who came up with the shape, who determined the shape of DNA, and had these very weird things to say about Black people and ability, and kind of was forced to resign from some positions in shame. And then someone who had access to his DNA found out he had something like 4 times more Black DNA than most white people. It was just very, very odd. There is a story about DNA and imprisonment. So someone who had been wrongly imprisoned for the longest amount of time, I think it was 35 years, who was released due to DNA evidence, but also someone who was someone who'd gotten away with a crime who was imprisoned because his DNA showed up in a familial database, as well as a story about Oprah Winfrey, whose DNA was tracked, but then before it came out said that it had been determined that she had Zulu ancestry, which is not what the DNA said, and stories about Barack Obama and his DNA, which there are still a lot of stories about his DNA. I could go on for hours.
So the process in that research, of course, informed like how we went on with the other Americana suites.
Yeah.
This project was a piece called Free Phase, and Free Phase, once again, happened in Chicago. It was commissioned by the Center for Black Music Research at Columbia College, and for that project, we were interested in how these things that we call freedom songs. Are you all familiar with that phrase, freedom songs? Do we know what that means? So for anybody who doesn't know, many people have heard African American spirituals, but these songs were sort of reworked during the Civil Rights Movement to place a new kind of emphasis on freedom, and the sort of political aspects of that music were put up front in these reworkings. And we wanted to think about how those songs went into physical spaces. And so one place that we went is to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And so this is the site of 1965's Bloody Sunday. And we recorded that structure with contact mics. So we put contact mics around the bridge and recorded the structure itself.
That's Keith in a very official-looking vest.
You better look official when you're messing around in something. Yeah, then people let you do all kind of things if you put on one of those vests, right? Like, they don't mind you hanging off bridges for a little while. Yeah, I got the vest, so give me a break. All right. And so we use those recordings to make a sort of sound and video version of the song "We Shall Overcome." So we use the sounds, internal sounds of the bridge itself, sort of vibrating with, traffic and pedestrians. So you could hear the sound from inside the structure, and we use that to sort of interpret this piece. Now this is the underside of the bridge, which, most of us, at least in my generation, we know it from seeing this kind of archival footage from the civil rights movement. But they're all kind of views of the bridge that I didn't know about. And so, underneath the structure itself was really kind of haunting and beautiful. And the sound of that space underneath the bridge really changed how I thought about that space. So that was 2015 when we were doing this piece. Another aspect, yes?
Play some of that sound. On the picture of the bridge, it looked like there was
Oh, yeah. And we're hearing kind of reduction here because this is a 4-channel piece. So layers are missing from this version that we have here. So what you're not hearing are the process sounds of this. So you are hearing the sounds through the bridge, but a lot
is missing.
Yeah. As a part of that same project, Free Phase, we did this piece called Beacon. Now, this is Chicago Cultural Center. And so this is downtown Chicago, and at the top of that building, we placed a large parabolic speaker. So this kind of speaker makes a narrow beam of sound that we can sort of project into the space. And what we really wanted to think about was how these songs, these freedom songs, are heard in public. So if you're in downtown Chicago, like any major city, you hear a lot of church bells. And what was interesting for us is that, you don't hear spirituals for the most part in public spaces. I mean, these are things that we associate with protests, but not with official structures, not with buildings. And so this is the speaker on the rooftop of the building, sort of pointing down into Millennium Park. And so just a bit of what that sounded like. And so we're playing phrases from these freedom songs at different times of day. And the pieces of music that we used relate to that time of day. Oops, did I?
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of it at the Chicago Cultural Center. We also had the same piece playing at the Rebuild Foundation on the south side. And what you'd hear different parts of the building, you could hear a bell-like sound. You could also hear the voices of a group singing phrases from these spirituals.
So at the Chicago Cultural Center, they were on different sides of the building, but at Rebuild, they were both coming from the same part. So as Keith said, this was very directional, so if you were a little bit out of the beam, you wouldn't hear it. But so one thing that was interesting on the South Side is that when there would be people who would hear that and then keep walking down the street singing the rest of the lyrics, which was, great for us. And maybe also because it was one of the few public signals in the area at that time. It kind of had a different kind of attention than
Keep advancing. We noticed that when we played in downtown Chicago, people assumed that this was a church bell. It wasn't officially sanctioned.
because there were other church bells in the area, so yeah, it was very much in that. The third part of it was this piece called Dialogue, where we had Chicago DJs play one-on-one sessions with people. So we had an archive of songs that came from the Center for Black Music, and one-on-one, or in this case, one-on-four. They'd play, so people would choose a song, and then the DJ would interview the people about the song and have a dialogue. We had a kind of scripted dialogue that we thought would take maybe 15 minutes, and they took on average an hour. Then we had to rescue the DJ, although the DJ didn't always want to be rescued. It was really interesting to watch, and it turns into the recordings of the conversations.
And so we usually had sort of 3 DJs working at a time. And part of what was interesting to us about the project is that the Chicago Cultural Center really is a kind of crossroads. So there are people coming from all over the world who have their own ideas about this archive and their own thoughts about freedom songs. Many people from all around the world were familiar with the idea of African American political freedom songs, and they really brought their own histories to this archive, and they shared a lot of those things with the DJs. Mm-hmm. And all the DJs that we selected were people who were already doing some kind of cultural work. So we were interested in people who were deeply invested in popular music and cultural work.
Yeah, also, we should say the Center for Black Music Research is a library at Columbia College in Chicago. And so we were thinking about DJs as archivists, and all of the people that we asked to be a part of the project thought of themselves as kind of stewards of this archive.
This is another Americana suite. This piece was called Sonic Migration. This was in the city of Philadelphia. And this church is a site called Tinley Temple. And so it was built in the 1920s. And Charles Albert Tinley was a leader of this church, but he was also an activist, a community activist, and a composer. And so we were kind of interested in all those histories. And this particular building, when the architects designed this building, they were doubtful that this black congregation would be able to pay the bill for completing the church. So they built it so that they could, convince them to resell it as a movie theater in case they weren't able to complete it. And so it has this kind of curious design. It's like maybe only the cross in the middle would tell you that it's a church, which becomes more significant when you realize all this gentrification has happened around the church recently. And so it was also a place for many sort of newcomers to the city of Philadelphia during the Great Migration. And so we wanted to kind of mark all of those interesting histories of this place. And so we took this old song by Charles Albert Tindley, By and By, When the Morning Comes, and we stretched it out to roughly about 20 minutes. So we took one phrase and we stretched it out so it would rise with the sun each morning. Yeah. Yeah.
Am I doing that or?
No, I'm doing that. I think in the interest of time, we're going to jump ahead to some more recent things.
Yeah, we can come back if there's more time later, but we're going to jump to our most recent projects. We have a series of what we call tono-types, and tono-types are pieces that use language from, particularly musical language from writings by, in the ones we're showing you by Black writers. They use musical language sometimes to talk about things that aren't necessarily about music, because we're thinking about all the things that actual sounds can hold, but we're also interested in the ways that sound produces ideas. Even the idea of sound produces other ideas.
So this piece is called The Bell Ring, and the site is at Mills College in Oakland. And we took this text from the autobiography of Congresswoman Barbara Lee. And so many people nationally know Barbara Lee as a, sort of the lone vote against military action after 9/11. against congressional authorization of military action. And so we wanted to look at this passage in her autobiography when she talks about the moment when she made that vote and she realized she was the only vote against military action.
Yeah, just another note, she's an alum of Mills College, which is kind of why we start to think about that for this piece. So that would play at on the hour with the actual bell from the bell tower.
So this next piece is called Timbre, and this was installed in Katona, New York, at a place called the Caremore. The Caremore is a site for a summer sort of music festival. It's mainly classical music, and we wanted to think about language from text that really gathered some interesting things sonically.
They also have a sound art grounds. They have sound art on the grounds during that festival. So.
And so this piece took language from Toni Morrison's first novel, The Bluest Eye. And we wanted to make a structure that itself could generate the sounds. So the sounds that you hear in this piece what you're hearing is the structure itself resonating.
The language from the novel is truth and timbre, and it's about a child overhearing adults speaking, and they're talking about things that are kind of beyond the children, so they don't understand language, but they understand the truth and timbre. So we wanted to think about producing that actual kind of sound from the structure.
So that's a little bit of timbre. And then a few yards away, on the other side of the property, we have this piece called Frequency. And Frequency takes language from the last lines of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And so we were interested in this idea of speaking on the lower frequency, which is on the lower frequencies, which is what he's getting at in the novel. We wanted to think about sound or communication that not everyone can hear, or things that are going on that we maybe need to pay closer attention to. And the sound here, if you're at the site, the sound is coming from the ground itself.
So we're going to talk a little bit about things we're working on now, and then open for questions. So we're about 3 projects that we're working on right now. The first one is called Slow Drag. Slow Drag is going to be at Counter Public in about a week and a half.
Counter Public is a triennial that happens in the city of St. Louis.
Yeah. And so our project is going to be a processional of, it's going to be a processional of cars. And what they're going to be playing is, let's see, we made a song that is based on a song from 1930 by a blues musician by the name of Lucille Bogan. It's basically a love song. And so we made our version and performed it with other people and recorded it, and then passed it to about 10 producers in the city of St. Louis who have done remixes. And we're putting all of those together, and the processional will play it, kind of wrapping the neighborhood that Counter Public happens in a love song. And so that's what that is.
Yeah, so they're circling the sort of St. Louis place community, this procession, and these are lyrics from the songs. So we do this process of making these things called lyrographs, where we're using lyrics from songs that we're dealing with. So the procession will be circling the community, so kind of mobile sound installation. The other piece that we're working on right now is a piece called Dream Train. So Dream Train, as the name suggests, is about dreaming and movement. And this grew out of a piece that we did during the pandemic. So around 2020 and 2021, we did this sort of overnight 8-hour stream of a piece called Lull. And so then we thought, okay, we'd like to sort of take that into a physical space now, or take some of those lessons into a physical space. And so we're building this piece now with the American Composers Orchestra, and we'll show a version of this in June with the orchestra. And so we're kind of rehearsing with the orchestra, trying to figure out how orchestras work. And so, yeah, we'll be doing a version of this project this summer. Yeah. And then the last thing that we're working on is a piece called Ring Shout. We're doing that again with the American Composers Orchestra, the Apollo Theater, National Black Theater. And we're making the small satellite, this is not the real thing, that will go up, and it'll be transmitting music and audio interviews as it sort of circles the Earth.
It's going to go up to space. He just said up.
I thought people know where satellites go. I mean, we hope it goes up, yeah.
Yes.
Up is better than down. We'll see. All right. So that's what we're working on now. Yeah. All right. So we'll stop there. Thank you. And so we're happy to take any questions if folks have questions.
Yeah. Yes.
Are any of these installations permanent, or are they all?
They're all temporary. Let me see if any of these are permanent. Oh, I mean, we didn't talk about, I think, the sort of one permanent thing is we have a piece in Times Square that is an app that you can download and hear poems and stories that sort of deal with the kind of physical history of Times Square. And so that app is a permanent installation and it's always available.
And it's triggered by where you are in relation to the map. So there are parts that you can hear from anywhere, but if you're in Times Square, it'll play different things for you
Yeah, so that's a one
as you navigate.
permanent piece, I think, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
we're seeing different people.
Yes.
So, since so much of your work is public, when you are showing it in a non-art context, can you share a little bit about, I mean, I would find it very magical and surprising that if I'm walking down the street and then I hear, something very unexpected. Have you been able to, kind of get feedback on that, or people watch as people experience the work?
I think, we do people watch. It's very difficult to get other kinds of information from people. As I mentioned earlier, watching people keep singing the rest of the lyrics in Chicago was very instructive for us. We're like, okay, it's working in this way, Like we didn't really know that it would necessarily work in that way. But we don't have like, a comment page or anything like that.
Well, some of the projects involve
Oh,
interviews,
sure.
like the Dialogue with DJs project. We've done several things like that where dialogue and sort of recording those dialogues is a part of the project, so we know what people think in those sort of conversations that are built into the project. But outside of that, when people sort of walk through the sound, we don't always know what people think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was just wondering about that piece, Lull, that you spoke of, and if there's anywhere that we could hear that.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Yeah, so everything is
Yeah.
there. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I want to thank you for bringing your work here. It's really fascinating to see. And I really like the way that it's interactive, because a lot of people do. I've seen a lot of sound installations, stuff in general. The way this makes itself available for civilians who, aren't new music people, who aren't art people or whatever, is really, really great.
Thank you.
I don't know a lot of people that in that area that are really treating sound art or one of those kind of terms as something that reaches out to communities the way that you were doing. There's a lot of people who do sound art, some that I really like, but it's really like if you're not a member of the club, it's just like, well, what is it?
Well,
There's this kind
I'm glad it feels that way.
Yeah.
This kind of wiggly sound in that tone. Is that something that's like really there, or is that part of them, or is that something from the air conditioner? And this is really wonderful work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that it reads that way. That's what we want it to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of to bounce off that point, it's more of a comment, like, this is extremely unique. I've been studying art history for like 10 years, and I'm about to go on a first date after this, okay? And I'm trying to explain, this lecture to my date, and I'm thinking, like, how is he gonna know that sound art isn't just like music that we hear on the radio or on Spotify? And this is just, I really agree that it's really accessible. And I think that that's so cool, and I'm wondering how I'm going to be able to correlate this accessibility that I felt in this room through these pieces with this date or with other people I tell y'all's work to. So it's been really interesting, and I won't lie, at first it was way over my head, and I didn't know what this lecture was going to be about, and I didn't think I'd understand any of it. And so I'm glad I came more into that, and it's really, really cool how you guys are merging your careers, and you guys are married.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting how you can merge sound and literature in this way. And just that I've really never experienced anything like this.
Well, I'm glad you like it. I hope it helps with the date. We will send links if helpful. I mean,
I was gonna say, I feel like we've made it. We're like making it to the date conversation. That feels like something has gotten through.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad. Yeah. I'm glad that. Yes. Yes.
You referenced some literature and music that are informing your work, but what inspires you collectively or as a couple, as individuals?
I mean, there are a lot of places that we could begin. I think there are two things that immediately came to my mind. One is all of our projects kind of have a long beginning as a conversation. And one of our very old conversations, which maybe we're not even having in the same way anymore, was about how music and literature or sound and language speak to each other, like all the ways that they can speak to each other, and particularly like how, say, literary theory and music theory are not talking about the same thing, right? But there's this kind of conceptual space between them that is just really fertile. There's just a lot there. And then the other thing I think that really inspires, I was going to say me, but I know it does Keith too, is that African diasporic musics, particularly in the Americas, hold so much information in them. And they come from African cultures that hold a lot of information too, but particularly after slavery, there are so many things that people depended on the music to communicate, that are not just musical, not just spiritual, but temporal, geographic, just all kinds of intellectual information that was held by the music. So we're interested in thinking about music as a code. Music is something that holds a lot of things, because that's something that music can do, but that's something that is really refined in our culture because of all the ways that music has been used. And so that is that's a well that, I'm thinking about whether I'm making the art or not, but, it's always what we're thinking about with the projects.
And related to that, I mean, across our projects, we're thinking about how sound, stabilizes or destabilizes an image. So when you're looking, we're often sort of listening for confirmation of what we're looking at. And other times the sound will make us question what we're seeing. And so those are things that's like a fruitful, inspiring area for us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're commissioned to create, but how do you, for like specific projects that you want to create, how do you receive funding?
We just make what we want to make, and then sometimes people say, we'll pay for it. I mean, I think just like anybody else, you're just making stuff. You make things because that's what you do as an artist. And when we're lucky, people say, oh, we'd like for you to do something like that here in this space, and then that's a good thing when that happens. But it doesn't have to happen. Like we just make things.
Did that answer your question?
I'll take it.
No, we can say more, but yeah.
I thought.
Yes.
I was curious if I could ask where you grew up and what was there something in your childhood culture that influenced both your career path and current work?
So we grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I think that really did influence, how much we think about music. But there are a lot of reasons why that would be the case. I mean, and it may not be the same for each of us, even though we did grow up together. I would say a couple of things, like there are a lot of recording studios, there are a lot of music shops. There's also this weird thing that Nashville's known as Music City, and that's associated with country music, but the name comes through the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And so there's this like kind of interesting racial dynamic between what's foregrounded and what's kind of quiet about Nashville being a music city.
And I'd also say, the fact that we work so much in public space has to do with, when we were growing up, there weren't a lot of museums around, right? So the art that we saw was public art. And so, early on, our kind of aspirations were to sort of make things that existed in public spaces because, growing up, that was where you encountered, these kind of ideas.
It's just what we knew, too. We didn't really, we didn't have a museum culture. I mean, I went to the Fisk Museum a lot, and there was a lot of interesting art there, but a lot of it, they had stopped collecting as much contemporary art.
Yeah, it's
right
like
on the top.
focused on modernism.
Yeah, focused on modernism. And the first that's there now wasn't there then. So we really hadn't really seen a lot of contemporary art in museums.
Growing up.
Yeah. Yes, since then we've seen
Since then, every now and then we make it
to a museum.
It helps.
Oh, did you have you done a performance or an installation in Nashville?
No. We keep telling people.
Yep, never had the opportunity.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that last project with the satellite and kind of what it's going to do and go back to the funding part of it?
Yeah, that's good.
Basically how all that took place, taking place.
So it's still in process. We started the process. An organization called Clock Shop asked us to come to LA or to Pasadena. They were asking artists to look at the archives of the science fiction writer Octavia Butler. So, we went through her materials and we found the story that she had written as a child, her first story.
And she'd written it over more than a decade. So there were pieces of it from when she was a very young person until when she was a very young adult.
And if you know her novels, you can see elements of this that sort of stayed with her in her later work. And so we're excited about that. And so, we sketched this idea to, use some language or some thread of that story. And we're originally trying to figure out how we're going to project it into space. And then Mendi said, well, it would be easier to just make a satellite. And I said, okay.
It seemed easier at the time than it does.
And so we started trying to figure out, how to make a satellite. And
this is really what our process is like. He was like, well, let's just go to space.
And it was easier than the things I suggested. Like, she was very good, and I was like, this is easier. And so we found the song that the ring shot is an African-American form. It's a musical form and a dance form, a circular dance. That you see all around the diaspora, but there's a particular African-American version of it that really it's kind of a cosmogram, like you're circling the earth. And so a lot of our projects are taking the implications of the music and doing that literally. And so we said, okay, we're gonna make this satellite, we're gonna tell a little bit of a story, and we're gonna deal with the idea of being named for the stars. Octavia Butler's middle name is Estelle.
And a character in her story, it was a long story, but the character in her story who is from space is going to take a trip to Earth, and someone tells her, like, okay, down on Earth in English, your name means star, right?
So we started interviewing young black girls and some women named Star. These interviews are going into our satellite. And so, over the years, we've gotten support from different organizations, like I said, the National Black Theater, the Apollo Theater, and the American Composers Orchestra. And so we've worked with a group of musicians to make music for this project, a band called Harriet Tubman. And we've collected the interviews and we're starting to build this satellite. And so hopefully it'll be launched next year.
Yeah.
What will the satellite
It'll
broadcast?
broadcast a radio signal, and so you'll be able to hear from our website and also over ham radio, so you'll be able to pick up these broadcasts as the satellite is circling Earth.
I'm curious about this picture here.
Oh, this is a live performance when we launched this app. The app is called Compass Song. And just like this project Ring Shot, this image here kind of references a cosmogram. We looked at a lot of sort of West African cosmograms, and so we're literally sort of making that form with this choir. We call this group the Listening Choir, so we performed out in Times Square. They are both singing the sounds of Times Square, the ambient sound of Times Square, and singing this spiritual Walk With Me. And so Walk With Me is obviously a spiritual song, a religious song, but it's also a song that was used in times of protest. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, as you play the app, you hear kind of our version of that song, but you also hear stories from what Times Square has been over time. So there's been lots of things, you know, it's been a farm, a plantation, it was a field with a Native American road that went through the town, through the field, called the Quatsic. So Broadway was always a road for centuries.
They're dressed in the colors that are associated with one of the cosmograms. So they go in, so they sing, we all sing together, and then during the performance, each group went off in a different direction that's associated with the color that they're wearing in this cosmogram, which also is like life, that these colors also, you know, are about like different stages of life. They go out in that direction for a while, they come back, and we all sing together. They go out again, and they come back. And it was just kind of and so some people who were there would travel with a group and then come back and then go out with another group. That was kind of but the idea was that they were also walking the territory that the app would trigger. So that's why that was part of the opening, because there was, you know, a way to kind of let people know that this was happening and perform something related to the stories and songs.
And this project kind of grew out of us sort of watching people in Times Square, and we knew we wanted to do something in Times Square. Whenever we talked to New Yorkers say, I hate Times Square, and all New Yorkers pass through Times Square with their earbuds in and their heads down.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to go with that physical gesture, you know, people sort of putting their earbuds and having their heads down.
Yeah, something that might tune you in, even if you were doing that, rather than tune you out.
Yeah.
Did you have to get a permit?
We were commissioned by Times Square Alliance, so yes.
Yeah, so the Times Square Alliance asked artists to do projects there. It's supported in part by the sort of business district there. And actually, like, we were advised in the Times Square Alliance, so we kept telling other people to do this project. And they said, why don't you do it? We're like, you should make an app where people are listening. And they're like, okay. We're like, no, just make an app. And they said, okay, you make an app. So that's how it came to be. We thought, other people also did it, but, we just kept pushing.
We've been telling them this for like 10 years, and they're like, okay, now you do it.
So, yeah.
I thought, your hand was that, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking over my head, because I can talk to you about this later, but I'm really interested in the research component of your practice. But as everybody's talking, especially when Herb was talking about kind of how generous your practice is, I was thinking about our conversation earlier. And we were talking about the fact that, these are just two very nice people. And we were just talking about ego and ego's role in art. And I have to say, I see little to no ego in the pieces, but I recognize that to have the nerve to do these pieces takes ego. Like I can see the role of ego, but also...
You see no ego in us being like, let's go to space.
Yes! And Pat is going to leave here and go, I want to know, can anybody make a satellite and send it to space? But that gets back to that whole research component. Like, I'm sort of wondering how you fund things a little bit, but mostly I'm wondering about how these things how they come to you, how they transpire, how they're manifested. Mm-hmm. The fact that you use these kind of unprimed audiences. Like somebody walks through the front door of the Modern, they have a notion of what they're getting into. You're tapping into something that is unaware, like circumstantial and, yeah.
So, yeah, we actually, we have a lot of conversations about that, and also about, how much can I say about this? I mean, when we're working in public, there are things that that we are responding to in the space that have to do with like what that space is used for, who else uses that space, who else is expected to use that space, who uses it, who's not expected, like who works in that space and what they're doing. You know, we think about a lot of those elements in order to make the communication clear and clean, you know? And, you know, it's really important when we work with institutions that they know these are the things that we are using or responding to because, you know, in order to speak directly to the audience, like we have to not, I don't know how to say what I'm trying, like we have to not mess up what the space is for, you know?
You have to respect it, yeah.
We have to respect it, and we need to get everybody on the team to respect it, because otherwise the communication is not clear. And yeah, we know like when we're working in a black box, when we're working with a white box, when we're working in public, that those are different. When we're working in a space that's private, but is used like a public space, that's different from a space that's public. You know, like we have a lot of ideas about all of those things that we are always responding to. So that's really important to us.
But obviously, the way the ego shows up, I think, is, I think, yes, you know, all artists, you know, like what keeps you going is ego to some degree. But for us, it's like the ego is about when you tap in, for us, or let me say for me, when we tap into the tradition in a way that is personal, you know, like that's when, you know, and that's a kind of private joy, you know what I mean? So I think that's the way it shows up.
Yeah, I think there are also some things about that. I was going to say something else about tradition. There are things that are not, I think, egotistical, but need to be protected. And they're not, they are personal, they're not individualistic,
Right.
they're communal, and those things I'm very protective of. And so, I don't know how that's experienced by other people, but I have a different response to things that are about our choices and different things that are about what's being done with the tradition of freedom songs. You know what I mean? I don't know if that is really answering your question or that's a whole nother question, but yeah.
Well, it was a lot. I mean, it was an observation and also a question, and that was a lot. So yes, you definitely did. Yeah.
Sorry, and I didn't realize you were trying to ask a question earlier. I thought you were like gesturing for me to.
No, that's good. That's good. I get to ask you questions at dinner. Right. Other people should ask questions. That's good.
Are there other questions? Oh, yes.
Just an observation. One of my favorite artists is Ella Natsui, and one of the things I love about his work is that he doesn't hold on to it so tight that he just has a singular vision. He lets it go wherever you see his pieces, the curator has actually, you know, formed those and shaped them on the wall or positioned them on the floor for the sculptural pieces. But I just think about the music scores that you guys had where you just, you know, you had something in your mind, but then you're letting it go to have this other experience of what the work could be. And there's something about that for me that I've observed and that just inspires me so much is that we have our own form of creation, but letting that go and putting it out into the public, it takes it to another level, that communal sense and that, and for African Americans, the survival sense, that when you come together, you're creating this, this bigger thing than yourself. And it adds another layer and complexity and beauty to the work, which I'm seeing in what you're doing. So thank you for the way that you work and the way that you share that with people and allow them to also sort of participate in what you're doing. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's kind of unusual for us, not to, but I do think.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I don't think of us as generous as L&S. I feel like, there are things that are about control, and then there are things that we let go of completely.
Yeah, I think that thing, though, was about coming together. I think, and so there are things for which there are very specific sounds that we're looking at, and then there are other things that are sound is like an occasion for gathering.
Yeah, communal listening.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.